The Nairobi Arbitration Week, as you know, has been co-hosted by NCIA and the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, Kenya. Today is specifically dedicated to the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators' 9th International Arbitration Conference. This morning we have the chairman's welcome address, or welcome remarks. We will commence with the remarks from the chairperson of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. Friends, colleagues, it is now my singular pleasure to request my good friend, the chairperson of NCA, Jacqueline Githinji, to please make her opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, hamjambo. Good, you're learning since Monday. So once again, my pleasure. Of course, I made my opening remarks officially on Monday. So really, this is just to reinforce the collaboration we have with the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Kenya branch. Resting on the protocols that have already been established, then allow me then to just make a few remarks. And before I do so, it would be remiss of me not to recognize the directors of NCIA who are present. I recognize Kananu Mutea, representative of the Chartered Institute, actually. Sam Beriri, also a representative of the Chartered Institute on our board. And those are the two present. I think the rest will be coming. And of course, I recognize our CEO. I think it's important that he stands because he is 3 weeks into the role. And there's possibly some of you who haven't quite met him yet, Dr. Henry Kinyanjui Murigi. So with those introductions, then today I stand inspired by the national anthem. And those of you who are visitors to Kenya may not understand why there are two different tunes playing back to back every morning. So the first tune that you hear is the national anthem of the Republic of Kenya, and it is a prayer. The second is the national anthem of East Africa. There are actually 3 stanzas. Most of us Kenyans don't know all 3. We are still learning. It is a work in progress, but it is something we try to reinforce in terms of our commitment to being partners and collaborators in the East African region. And for that reason, we will then commit to learning the words so that we can espouse them as eloquently as we do the words of our national anthem. So our national anthem, O God of all creation, bless this, our land and nation. Justice be our shield and defender. May we dwell in unity, peace and liberty, plenty be found within our borders. For those of you who are here long enough, I will teach you the Kiswahili version as well. So just to understand then that already within the words of our national anthem, we do recognize that everything we do then impacts everybody that traverses our borders. So anybody that is internal to Kenya, anyone that is a visitor to Kenya, will then receive the blessings that we pray for on a day-to-day basis. And these blessings include the blessing of justice. So those of us who are players, as ADR practitioners, as users of ADR, as judges of the bench, justice is a stalwart and something that we pray for and aspire to every single day as Kenyans in the wider context of the East African region. Of course, beyond East Africa, we recognize that we are players in a wider ecosystem. And like I said on Monday, if you do not know that there is an African Renaissance going on, then I'm sure you have been certainly alive to it as you have continued to interact with us in these sessions and outside of these hotel confines. So everything you see is a reflection then of all the interest that is currently focused on Africa. So with that in mind, as you engage with us, you will no doubt recognize the talent that is present on the continent, the knowledge, the skills, the continuing expertise that is growing on the continent. And on that basis, then we will continue to collaborate in ways that are necessary for global progress, for continental progress, for the region's progress, for Kenya's progress. So as we continue to engage with you in the various sessions that are left, both in the 2-day conference of the Chartered Institute running today and tomorrow, and in our penultimate day on Friday, no doubt you will continue to see this playing out. So I don't want to take more time than that. I wish you fruitful deliberations over the course of the next 2 days within the C.Arb conference, and of course in our final day of the Nairobi Arbitration Week. So once again, thank you for taking our invitation seriously and being present. I think you remember the Solicitor General being quite surprised that it seemed that we had more international delegates than we do Kenyan delegates. So we're thankful then for all of you honoring our invitation, for continuing to be with us over the last 3 days and into the next 2 days. We look forward then to your continued interaction, your continued collaboration with our Republic. Thank you.
I want to rest on the protocols that have been established. Today we are expecting to have an interesting, exciting day, and we will be receiving different guests at different times. And this is what is going to make our 9th International Conference at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators Kenya branch conference for 2025. So you are actually the early birds in that endeavor and that engagement that we are going to have. So when I look around the room, I feel very happy. Yes, I'm very happy to see you all. I'm very happy that we've been able to get through the first 3 days of the Nairobi Arbitration Week in collaboration and in partnership with the Nairobi Center for International Arbitration. So first, let us put our hands together for partnership and collaboration. I thanked the chair and the team for NCIA for allowing us to co-host the Nairobi Arbitration Week. And I do believe that we have seen what the synergies can do and assist us to build arbitration, not only in Kenya or East Africa, but around all of Africa. And the other reason I'm very happy today is because today is International Happiness Day. Now, happiness is a feeling, but more than that, it is a sense of contentment and satisfaction. And I believe we can be a little bit happy, a little bit joyful, a little bit content, and a little bit satisfied with the progress that we have made. And I say that because the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators is in Kenya for now, this April, 41 years. Can we clap for the C.Arb Kenya branch? And I am exceedingly happy because one of the founder members of C.Arb Kenya branch is here with us today, the Honorable Mr. Richard Mwongo Justice. Please stand up so that we can give you the accolades for and on the behalf of the founders of C.Arb Kenya. And if you see him sidling very closely to the Honorable Justice Kajimanga, it is because they have had a close working relationship since they established the branch in Zambia. So can we clap for those two gentlemen? I think those two gentlemen, they are the pillars upon which arbitration in Africa has been built. And so allow me to, first of all, recognize again, I know he has been recognized, the Chief Justice, the Honorable Chief Justice of the Republic of Zambia. And I'm going to tell you why. I like explaining things a little bit. He is the patron of C.Arb Zambia branch. And all the Zambians here say, yeah, amen. I think you should say amen and clap for him, right? And all of us here, let us also appreciate him because he is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators in his own personal capacity. I know we've recognized him as a Chief Justice, also as a senior counsel, but he is a fellow. Just like many of us either are or are aspiring to be. Maybe we can put our hands together properly and thank the Honorable Chief Justice. He's a very inspiring, speaker first, but also he's had a great footprint on the jurisprudence and the spread of ADR in Zambia. And by his example, we know that a lot more is going to happen around Africa and hopefully the world. Right behind him is my sister, Nakasamba, the chairperson person of C.Arb Zambia branch. And I think, allow me to also take a moment to recognize her for being here and for bringing a very large Zambian delegation. So please, Madam Chair, with your Zambian delegates, can you please stand up so that we can recognize all of you this morning? I'm not just talking about the Zambian C.Arb members. Anybody who happens to be of the nationality of Zambia, please stand up so that we can give you a hearty East African welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much. You may be seated. And when I look across the room, you'll allow me to be a little bit biased. By the way, this is our baby, Zambia. C.Arb Kenya supported their establishment. We also have a new baby that is on the way to becoming a branch. And I will mention them first because they are my children. We have the chairman of the Uganda C.Arb chapter, David. And because we clap for the Zambians together as a group, if you're from Uganda, because I can see a few of you from Uganda, just stand up. We acknowledge you together. Oh, there they are. Look at that. When I stand as C.Arb, I tend to be very, very happy. And of course, you'll hear me say happy today a lot because, first of all, we are a happy people. We bring people together. We make a difference in people's life. We have impact. And almost always, we make this world a better place. And it makes us happy. But of course, I'll still keep on emphasizing that today is International Happiness Day. And there are so many people that I would commend and thank because we truly do stand on the shoulders of giants. Before I speak about some of our other guests, allow me, because of protocol, to recognize one of our own. And I will claim him as one of our own because he is a son of Africa. He's a son of Africa. Even though he represents us in the apex body of C.Arb as the global president. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for the first African global president of C.Arb International, Professor Mohamed Wahab. And you clap like you mean it. Professor Wahab is a role model to so very many of us. He has guided us in the practice of arbitration, international arbitration, regardless of whether it's commercial or ISDS. And we look up to him, and we put him as when we grow up, this is what I want to be. I think that's on our vision board. And I learned when we were in Zambia that he has done 216 arbitrations. Senior counsel tells me 265. I don't know. It's 265. Huh? The question you need to ask yourself, because he's a role model, how many arbitrations have you done? Yes? And we're going to have an opportunity to hear from him so that we can also learn from him, not only about what the institution stands for, but also about what you and I, as individuals, can be able to glean from his practice and accomplish the footprint of African arbitrators. Because we are now in the era where we are saying that we want an Africa for Africans. When it comes to international arbitration, that means you and I, yes? And I know James is looking at me and thinking, okay, an Africa for African, but he is our honorary Kenyan. Huh? So put your hands together also for our guest, James, hold on. And I have many things to say. I don't know if I have the time to say them, but I feel a burden to say this. The more things change, the more they remain the same, the truth. We usually use it in the context of God is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. But the truth of the matter is, so many different things have happened, and they have happened in the last 100 years or so, and we are looking forward and thinking, how do we plan for the next 100 years or so? And that is why we have had the theme of the Nairobi Arbitration Week being arbitrating or arbitration in an age of sustainability. And sustainability just means, let us look at where we have come from, let us look at where we are today, and let us look at where we are going tomorrow. And I think the ultimate consideration is to ensure that whatever is happening today, and most of it is about investment. When we sit here as commercial beings, we're talking about how do we exploit our resources, and how do we do so responsibly? And I think the word to underline there is responsibly, so that our children and our children's children, and hopefully our children's children's children, will also be able to exploit the resources that we have in the world. Now, a couple of paradigms have been turned on their head since we started speaking about what the world really is. The biggest one that has collapsed completely is that issue of the population bubble. Do you remember it? One day we are going to become so many human beings in this world that we are going to overpower the world, and then this word comes up, existentialism. The world is going to end, and there's a lot of scaremongering and fear that has come up in that particular context. But the truth of the matter is, and this is data that supports this, population has not exploded to the extent that it cannot support us. The problems that we have been discussing about environmental change and the energy crisis is that we are working at cross purposes with the resources that we have. And that is where the tension comes in. I listened to a professor, I think he's called Professor Arthur Brooks, recently, and he said, yes, there was a time when population growth was moving in the direction of every woman was having more than 4 or 5 children. Today, the average number of children per family is less than 1. So we are actually not replacing ourselves, and we are living in a world where we do not have enough people, believe it or not. And many things have come out of that. And what the problem with the commercial world is looking for markets, is looking for a place to provide our services. We are too, and we are feeling the pinch now, maybe because we don't have sufficient people. And all I wanted to say is, we have not really changed how people have been in the past. We have only changed the way we interact with the resources that we have in our world today. And as we move along, as we come to the close of the Nairobi Arbitration Week, we thought that it would be important, in line with the change that we are perceiving, which is not real change. It is just a change in semantics. And when I say that, I know at the beginning I talked about drill, baby drill, and we have all been shaken a little bit by what the new administration in America has adopted, their foreign policy approach. It is really just a change in the overt way it has been expressed. And I also listened to Professor Jeffrey Sachs recently, and he said something that I thought that I would share with you this morning. And that something is, the foreign policy, the way we have begun to conceptualize how we engage with each other, it has become game theory, and we have moved from negotiation theory. Remember, the United Nations Charter talks about, in Article 33, the application of alternative dispute resolution. All the cousins are named there, the same way they are named in our constitution at Article 159 and the Zambian constitution at Article 118. So, what then is the difference between negotiation theory and game theory? And I'll give you how I have come to understand game theory. And it's through the example of the prisoner's dilemma. Have you heard of that? Yes? The prisoner's dilemma is very simple. If the police, for a discussion, read regulator, if a regulator catches two people in wrongdoing, what do they always do? They separate them and put them in two different rooms. And when they go into the two different rooms, what then happens? You have good guy, bad guy approach, let's call it that. And in the different rooms, they would tell them, you know, your colleague in room number A is already spilling the beans, so spill the beans, right? And in room number 2, they will be telling them the exact same thing about their counterpart in the other room. And 9 out of 10 times, the prisoner's dilemma succeeds in favor of the regulator because they cave. And they will reveal, or they will spill the beans. In the world that we are in today, we are not negotiating anymore on an equal state or an investor-state equal relationship, or even the different people who are negotiating for goods and services, it's not always equal. And basically what has happened with the new application of game theory is everybody has now had to retreat and ask themselves, am I in trouble? If I don't play this game, am I going to lose out? And how, I think there's a small phrase that we use. What is in it for me? Just remember Wi-Fi. What's in it for me? So when the foreign policy changes to the Westphalian model, and when I say Westphalian model, I mean I am Kenyan. I am Kenyan. You are Zambian. We have Indians. We have people from the UK. When I'm thinking about me and my nationality, we cannot get together and engage on regional cooperation and partnerships. Africa, we have just signed the AFTA convention, which has created the largest market if you count the number of people or if you look at the size of the continent. So in that sense, if we move forward together in that way, what do they say? Divided we fall, but together we achieve great things. There are many African parables that speak to that particular conception. And so when I invite you today to our conference, I am inviting you because we want to strengthen an Africa that is based on sound, I think we call them in C.Arb the centenary principles. And each and every one of our jurisdictions, we want to have safe seats. I want to champion the thinking that the safe seat should not only be Nairobi is the safe seat, or Lusaka is the safe seat. I think Malawi is also doing something tomorrow. I want us to think all our seats collectively are safe seats because the disputes will arise in different spaces, and therefore, when we look at the centenary principles, I will tell you the last 3 days we have been discussing about law. That's principle number 1. In fact, the last 40 years in Africa, we have been talking about law. And what have we been saying to ourselves? We have the New York Convention. We have the UNCITRAL. We want all African countries to make their jurisdictions UNCITRAL nations. And by and large, we have succeeded. Which therefore brings us to the next principle, which is the principle of, who knows? The judiciary. And therefore, today, we are very privileged to be able to discuss very many topics, start the discussion on the role of the judiciary. Usually we say that the principle is non-interference by the judiciary. I said the more things change, the more they remain the same. I doubt that we are going to depart from that particular premise. But we are going to be thinking, speaking, and ensuring that our judiciaries, and they have done a fantastic job because I've interacted with them. They have done a great job of being independent, of being competent, of being efficient, and also acquiring and reposing in their ranks expertise in international commercial arbitration and investment arbitration, and also pushing forward this premise that the party autonomy is fundamental to how the disputes will be resolved in the present times and also in the future times. So when I speak about the judiciary, I was giving him a moment to join us, sit down, and hopefully settle. But we have been joined by one of our senior members in Kenya's Supreme Court, the Honorable Dr. Justice Smoking Wanjala. No, it's not every day I get a chance to tell these guys to stand up. Huh? What I can tell you about Dr. Smoking Wanjala, the most important is that he is a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. That he sits on a bench in the Supreme Court, and this is for you, Dr. Mumba Malila, it's a challenge. I'm dropping the gauntlet. He sits on a Supreme Court comprised of fellows of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, the only one of its kind in the world today. I think he deserves a round of applause for and on the behalf of the Supreme Court, and also as a beacon of hope for other members of the judiciary, Kenya's judiciary. We have very many fellows, members, chartered arbitrators in the judiciary in Kenya, and I know that Zambia is really catching up with us. So the challenge is to see that it happens in Kenya, it happens in Zambia. I have singled out Uganda. I can see my very good friend Victor Mugabe from Kigali. That challenge, please take it to your Supreme Court and every other nation in Africa that is represented here today. So, you know me, I like to talk, and I can talk for a really good time, for a long time. Allow me to give my final remark, which is, this is before I also declare our International Arbitration Conference, 9th International Arbitration Conference officially opened. I would like to recognize my vice chairman, that is Professor, and yes, we are calling him Professor now, Professor Dr. Kenneth Wayne. He is the chairman of, vice chairman of C.Arb Kenya, and you can see I'm also doing succession, so I will not say the rest. I do believe that we have other former chairmen of C.Arb Kenya branch. If you're present in the room, please stand up so that we can also recognize your presence. There is Emeritus Chairman Sam Deritu, Emeritus Chairman Professor Kariuki Migwa. You may be seated. I will request that you allow me, because I'm a nominating authority in this regard, to let you know that Kenya branch will be sponsoring a candidate for the global presidentship at C.Arb, and that is none other than the person of Professor Kariuki Migwa. Please put your hands together for him. And for our brothers and sisters around Africa, you know what that means. We are looking for your support in that regard. I don't think I see any other members of my board. I would just request that Africa Trustee, please come forward as we clap for you, Dr. Chikwendu Madumere. It looks like he's the one who is representing all of Nigeria and all of West Africa in this conference today. So put your hands together for him as well. So ladies and gentlemen, with those few or very many remarks, allow me to declare the 9th International Conference of C.Arb Kenya branch officially open. Today we'll be speaking a lot about the judiciary, and we'll be hearing from our Kenyan judiciary and the judiciary in Zambia. And I do believe that it will augment all the discussions that we have had. And to do this, I requested any member of C.Arb Kenya branch to stand up so that I am not doing this on my own. Please. C.Arb Kenya branch members, if you are a member, a fellow, an associate of C.Arb Kenya, you are the host today. I can see our chartered arbitrator, Joroge Rigeru. Yeah, I can see our seniors. They are spread around the room. Allow me, because we have been championing the ladies, to also champion the chairperson. I'm the only chairman here who's a lady. The chairperson of the Nairobi National Construction Authority, Mercy Okiro. She has represented the youth for a long time. I don't know whether she's still youth, but she has, and she has done a good job. So while you sit down, allow me to request Senior Counsel John Ohaga and the Honorable Dr. Architect, Senator Kasanga, Sylvia, to kick us off with the program today. Thank you very much for your attention.
It's a privilege to stand before you today. Very grateful for the invitation. Delighted to be in Kenya, Nairobi, on African turf. So I think it is time for Africa. Let me say this. I've chosen a topic, sustainability in context. And I know I initially had about 30 minutes, but maybe we're tight on time, so I'll try to compress as much as possible my time. I chose a title. The event, Arbitrating in the Age of Sustainability, is great. I want to look beyond the slogan and the words and the semantics. In order for us to see where we are and where we're heading, we need to know the past, capitalize on the present in order to make a better future for the continent and African people. I'm going to look at that from a macrocosmic rather than microcosmic approach. That's why I call microcosmic ruminations. And I've chosen to refer to the indigenous native name of Africa that seems to have been forgotten, Alkebulan. And I say that because as of the 17th century onwards, with colonialism, with various sort of civilizations, the name Africa came to light. We can debate the origins, but the indigenous name is Alkebulan. And it is interesting to know more about the continent and where we stand today. So, what I want to start with, we want this week to be different. Not yet another week of festivities, networking and happiness, and I'm great that all of you are happy, and it's good to rejoice and be happy, but we need to have takeaways and a plan of action. It's good to have gatherings, but it's important to walk with some thought-provoking ideas for the better future of our continent, and I think the world at large. Because let me tell you this, dispute resolution goes hand in hand with business. You cannot at all consider that we are going to resolve disputes on the continent without creating business hubs on the continent. So in a nutshell, and our chairperson has spoken about the safe seat principles of the C.Arb, which we will address in the panel during the day. But again, in order to have a seat or a place for arbitration on the continent, which I think is still a work in progress, you need to have a business hub. You will not create a seat in a vacuum. So that is also key. Then I will end with a slide about whether we're ready and what to expect. But before I do that, let me start with a saying by a Zimbabwean-born Canadian philosopher who said that be wise enough to learn from the past, shrewd enough to capitalize on the present, and clever enough to prepare for the future. And speaking of game theory, as Madam Chair has mentioned, when we are in a world of game players, I have to tell you this candidly, and people who have heard me speak know that I'm quite candid. It is now or never. The reality is, you want to be part of that, you need to be a game changer. The issue is, Africa possesses all the tools, but still is not the game player one would expect. So you hold all the cards, but they are distributed and the game is played by others. Now is the time whether you want to take a stand to also participate in the game. Speaking of the future, and again, an African proverb, also Kenyan origin, what we do today affects the future generations effectively, not just in terms of climate, in terms of economy, in terms of politics, in terms of law. This continent has once, and continues to be the cradle of civilizations, pretty much ruled the world, yet we are where we are. We have to consider which path we need to walk from this point onwards. And speaking of this, let me move quickly to the origins and roots of sustainability. So ancient civilizations, whether it's the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek, or even in sub-Saharan Africa, have addressed issues of sustainability. And because they were agriculture-based civilizations pretty much, issues of deforestation, salinization, and loss of fertility were at the forefront of the challenges since the dawn of time. And then philosophers, geographers, and agriculture experts like Plato, Strabo, and Clumella all addressed problems of environmental degradation. So you see, it's not new at all, from farming, logging, and mining. And the whole host of authorities, of philosophers, decision makers, rulers, the idea for them was how to ensure an everlasting youth of Earth, and indeed on the continent as a result of human activities. Now, what we face today in terms of challenges is a result of the Industrial Revolution that brought about technological advancements that caused a degree of environmental degradation. Now, whether we have a sustainable future or not is in our hands. Now, Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill, early on, in fact, in a first published book on economics, Principles of Political Economy, addressed the concept of stationary state. Criticized at the time, now became a reality. The idea of a stationary state was a hypothetical economic state where wealth and population growth cease. And I want you to mark the word growth because we're going to address that. People champion growth. I would like to champion development because growth, as we will see, is more quantitative, whereas development is qualitative. So anyway, the economic state where wealth and population growth cease, you reach a peak point, not necessarily implying stagnation, but rather a focus on quality of life and human development rather than material expansion. So higher living standards, better living conditions for everyone, increased profit rate per capita, reduced cost of labor, and increased productivity. That was the idea about the stationary state. But what is important in terms of sustainability, because that is one of the important roots and origins of that, is the potential environmental consequences that John Stuart Mill at the time referred to as the potential impact of the destruction of the environment and reduced quality of life, forced reduced quality of life. And he wrote at the end of the principles of his book, The Principles of Political Economy, I sincerely hope for the sake of posterity, future generations, that The world's population will be content to be stationary long before necessity compels them to. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a key theme of what we are going to discuss today. I'm not going to go through the debate economically between economists and political philosophers about that, because we all know the impact on the environment. That is for another day. But I intended to walk you through the changes that happened since the 60s and the 70s and post-World War. I will not do that. I will move directly to two important aspects. A report by the Club of Rome, specifically in the early 70s, 1972 precisely, where they said that because the limited resources of Earth are finite, if the present growth trends in the world population, industrialization, pollution, food production, and resource depletion continue unchanged, what's going to happen is that we will have limits, and there will be a decline in both population and industrial capacity, which is what we are witnessing and one of the greatest fears we're facing today. Now, this has prompted the United Nations in a conference in Stockholm 1972 to start acting in that sense. Now, even though we're talking this more than 55 years ago or so, it is important to highlight that, again, sustainability and issues relating to the environment and economic welfare were at the forefront of discussions. Then, in the 80s, we had the World Commission on Environment and Development and the Brundtland Commission and report. I will just mention the following, that in the report that came out in 1987, the highlight was three fundamental components of sustainable development: the environment, the economy, and society. And I say these three things because it is interesting that Africa is the last standing continent with undepleted natural resources. So in terms of the environment, because of the lag in industrialization, and even though we do have pollution, still Africa has a lot in terms of its resources. Economy, it is a home to the fastest growing economies in the world, even when there is a stagnation in the world. And why it is the fastest growing economies? Because in the past we have not been doing very well, so we're trying to catch up. And because there is an attention worldwide to African resources and doing more and more on the continent by all countries. Thirdly, society. Now, this is a continent which is a home to more than 3,000 tribes, great civilizations, generous people, even when we don't have much, but also, and interestingly, wise people. And I think it is time that we capitalize on this wisdom for the benefit of future generations. Now, the Brundtland report concluded by referring to a switch to sustainable development rather than economic growth. So you see, it is not new. Then, of course, we have the Conference of Parties, the Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement, as you all know it, and the incoming COP30 that's going to be held in Brazil. But let me say, what we are witnessing today in Africa is that we are suffering consequences that we did not primarily contribute to. The greenhouse effect and the CO2 emissions, the result of industrialization, is the making of others. Yet, we are required not to contribute to worsening the situation and yet progress towards economic welfare, which means that our hope is better exploitation of resources in a greener environment and transitioning into renewable resources which the continent is rich in. Now, this brings me to some of the realities that we need to go through. The Earth Overshoot Day. Now, in 2024, just so you know, what is the Earth Overshoot Day? Humanity's demand on natural resources in a given year. So, Earth generates resources in a year. We have a global population, billions of people. if we divide these resources by each individual use per year, you will find that in 2024, humanity would have consumed the Earth-generated resources almost mid-year, by August 1st. So effectively, we are living on borrowed time for the remainder of the year. And every year, the date is getting even closer to the beginning of the year. To give an idea, and if you're interested, and it's all available online, looking at cities. Now, if you're living in Qatar, for example, if all humanity lives like everyone in Doha, for example, we will deplete the resources in February. Right? Luxury living, good living, everything, but the resources will be depleted by February. If you're in Uruguay, it's going to be by December. By the way, for Kenya, if you want to check, if everyone in the world lives like Kenyans, it's going to be on or around in July. Right? Yes, halfway through. 16th of June for 2025, actually. Even though with a country that is rich in resources as well. And we'll come to that. So again, the point I made earlier, qualitative rather than quantitative. Development is about qualitative change rather than quantitative change. And I think it's not only anymore about the use of resources, the allocation of resources, but also what to produce and in what quantities to ensure a sustainable future. And this brings me to what does this all mean for us in Africa and for those who are doing business with Africa. Interesting statistics, the reality. Africa is home to 30% of the world's mineral reserves. One continent has 30% of the global mineral reserves. 8% of natural gas, 12% of the oil reserves, and people are anyway transitioning from fossil fuels. The continent has 40% of the world's gold reserve, 60% of cobalt, with one specific country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the leading country in the world on cobalt, and we will come to that because it relates to rare earth elements which are needed for everything we do today. 90% of the reserves of chromium and platinum. Name another continent that is close enough to that, there is none. Yet, it is home to the poorest countries in the world. Think about this. A billionaire that does not have a penny to spend. Everyone is using the money of that billionaire, except that billionaire, him or herself. Think about that when you next think how to manage the resources of the continent. It holds 65% of the world's arable land, 10% of the internal freshwater sources, which is the next global challenge. And I hate to say it, the wars that are hopefully will not come will be over water. So this is just a map of the minerals that the continent hosts. Oil, gas, coal, copper, bauxite, gold, diamond, timber, uranium, titanium, chromium, cobalt, manganese, phosphate, platinum, everything really. And we have 18% of the world population, and in Africa, 50% of the African population is in their 20s. And we have yet to find ways to channel the human resources to good use to increase productivity. Think about China, for example, which is the state that hosts the largest number of people on the globe. How they managed to channel this to productivity with almost the threshold of above 2 billion Chinese or so people. I think there are lessons to be learned there. We have abundance of solar energy, hydro, wind, geothermal, name it, and we have it. And again, this is in relation to energy transition, not just earth minerals, but also we've been blessed with resources in terms of renewable energy. Now, the reality is the World Bank predicts that by 2050, the demand for clean energy, and this is where the next big thing is happening, including graphite, lithium, and cobalt, is going to increase by 500%. China and the United States are battling over those elements that are needed to secure technological advancement and economic ambition. So again, Africa holds the cards. The game cannot be played without those cards. You're distributing the cards and you're watching the game being played. When are you going to take a seat to play the game? You decide. Now, these critical minerals, cobalt, lithium, and nickel, in addition to rare earth elements, and these are 17 elements, and they're not rare because they are not in abundance. It's because sometimes the cost of their extraction is more than the return, yet they define everything. All the devices that you hold in your hands and you have today at home in terms of technology is part of those rare earth elements. China dominates 90 to 97% of these rare earth elements, and the US now is reconsidering that because it's a strategic and political and economic battle that they believe it is important to rebalance and recalibrate in that sense. But to give you an idea, China imported 90% of its cobalt from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and in 2024, Côte d'Ivoire was China's third largest supplier of nickel ore. Again, these are some statistics between comparing US and China, and we can see the Chinese investments, a great vision in advance. Look at this, more than $8 to $10 billion focused on critical mineral projects compared to almost $300 million by the US. That is changing. Now, how can the continent have leverage in that sense? Again, better resource management, good negotiations. And let me say this, the continent is not today devoid of talented people who understand economics, politics, and are able to contribute to this global discourse. Now, these are the 17 rare earth elements, and everything from electronic vehicles, photovoltaic cells, lithium batteries, phones, devices, anything that is powered by technology is, to a large extent, derived from those rare earth elements. So, as a matter of fact, Africa controls the future of the world, but not Africans. Again, we see that in 2025, when you look at the reports, it is predicted that it's a tipping point for Africa. That's why I'm saying this event is indeed important, because it marks a new era where there is a tipping point. Either Africa continues the way we are continuing, or contributes to the global discourse, because the continent output is projected to provide 100% of the global supply within 5 years, and there are new mining endeavors in Malawi, South Africa, Tanzania, and Angola to that effect. The European Commission is alive to that and says that the shift is moving not only from fossil fuels to renewable energy, but to the rare earth elements with higher demands by 2040. Now think about the trajectory of development for Kenya, for Tanzania, for Uganda, for Nigeria, for Egypt, for South Africa, Sub-Saharan North Africa, West, East, everything. If you continue to play or try to play the game individually, none of the players will make it to the pitch. The only way is for African countries to work together, and I mean together, and I know that there is a race between countries in Africa, but look, we've been competing with each other for years, for decades. Where did that bring us? I wouldn't say much, but look at the European Union model when it started, perhaps not today. The ability to have leverage in negotiations, to make a difference, is key. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is one important initiative that I think shows that there is a degree of cooperation and willingness to collaborate. Now, if we do a survey and a study of the resources on the continent and develop a plan of action, a roadmap on how best to utilize that with a united front to negotiate deals, I think the impact will be colossal on African economies. Speaking of business, and I'm going to end soon, speaking of business, in 2024, there's been an economic upswing. But don't be fooled. It's good that we're doing better. But the pace could be much better. But alongside, external debt and servicing burdens are still high. Debt restructuring, many African economies are in debt. And most exposed markets have sought and secured additional assistance in that sense. The outlook, the perception, is that the continent proved fairly attractive, of course, because there are the resources. Dynamic, yet remains unstable and volatile, which is key to the discussions we're having about business hubs and seats. Now, speaking of another concept, African dynamism. As we mentioned, the continent is home to fastest growing economies in the world. And in 2025, half of the African countries remain under IMF programs, grappling with significant macroeconomic stability challenges. Again, speaking of proper governance and better management of resources. Challenges in relation to geopolitical tensions, climate change, and social unrest continue to be risks that the continent has to grapple with. With a vested interest by the global community into African resources, I think it is high time that Africans rethink their approach to their resources, to their environment, to their society, to their culture. And speaking of business and arbitration going hand in hand, just so you know that international arbitration, and many of you are aware, of course, of the Green Pledge and the great work being done there, these are just some statistics about the carbon emission from the arbitration community only. And I am always fascinated by how we think very highly of ourselves, and we think that the world revolves around us as arbitration practitioners, and that everything is focused on arbitration. But let me tell you, in the world of trade and economy, arbitration is a negligible percentage. And no matter how high we think of ourselves, as a matter of fact, we are still dwarfed by the big economic sectors existing elsewhere. To the extent that AI, which presents a challenge, just now drew their attention to law and dispute resolution, because it was not a very attractive field before to invest in, to make a change. Now it is. So in reality, we are causing a degree of pollution, and we are creating an unsustainable environment. And this brings me to the last part of my presentation. What are African arbitration institutions doing in terms of sustainability? And here I'm just not saying that African arbitration institutions are supporting sustainability. What I would like to present to you is whether these institutions themselves are sustainable. How many institutions open? How many institutions continue? And how many institutions continue to manage cases, not just to do events? It's good to do events. It's good to build capacity. But what remains important is whether you can do the work. And the work that needs to be done is to administer cases. And if more African institutions administer cases, the more likely you will have more African-seated arbitrations. And the gradual footprint that you make globally means that you will be able, effectively, to make a difference and create a business hub for Africa, which will help the economy make people's lives better, social and economic welfare. Now, there is, again, a proliferation of arbitration institutions. And in fact, it is no longer about every African country. It's almost every African city. Where are these institutions going or heading? And are they going to help build capacity? It's good, of course, to spread the word about dispute resolution and building a stable legal environment and rule of law. But in reality, the sustainability of these institutions is at risk. And again, the key word is not about growth in terms of number. It's about sustainable development in their ability to attract business. So in terms of sustainability as we know it today, what have our institutions on the continent done? Not yet much, but at the very least we're aware. An example, the Australian Arbitration Centre, ACICA, has developed a protocol on sustainability, greenhouse emissions, with sustainability measures in relation to travel, electronic documents, virtual hearings. Now, the Africa Academy has done a virtual hearing protocol, of course. But interestingly enough, when I was looking and preparing for the keynote, I found something also relevant for Kenya. The NCIA themselves have done, in 2022, a track of climate change action for arbitration in Africa. And when you look at the report provided, they did acknowledge that there is a rise in the number of claims before arbitration centers, specifically in relation to climate change as well, and saying that this is likely to increase, and it will increase. And it will increase along the supply chain disruption issues, not just environmental claims, but anything in relation to the resources. And I'm telling you, mark my words, the rare earth elements in terms of mining and processing are going to form a great part of the new energy disputes that we will see. And so climate change, the NCIA as well concluded by saying climate change is leading to new economic realities and legal frameworks. And now it's up to African states, institutions and practitioners to decide how we action plan that. Are we ready? You need new legislative infrastructure, proper laws. You need better investment opportunities. You need to have more modernized approach to managing investment and better administration in terms of dealing with investors. It is not uncommon that you have investment claims, some of which are very credible claims. Dispute avoidance is key. Why would you go as an African state or a Latin American or even Asian state to a dispute when you know that you have done wrong in a way? And I say that because we have a culture on the continent that better go and get an award that will be enforced against the country than any official participating in a pre-dispute settlement and then being accused of being corrupt. So make it someone else's problem, because you're going to be anyway retired by the time. The problem is going to be our sons and daughters' problems. So one of the important things is how we manage disputes, how we avoid disputes, and ultimately, if it's unavoidable, then resolved. This enables people to focus more on doing business rather than being in the business of doing disputes. Now, African institutions have a role to play, and I mean not just arbitration institutions, but institutions across the continent. Because there will be a new stream of novel disputes, as we see, in relation to renewable energy, in relation to water resources, in relation to measures taken by governments, in relation to artificial intelligence, which is a big thing that is probably for another day. I will leave you with these few thoughts, but what I hope that we can take away is that going forward, we will think of an action plan across the board. Countries, practitioners, institutions coming together to develop a blueprint plan for the continent on how to leverage on the resources, how to contribute to the global discourse, and how to be part of the game that is being played. Thank you very much, and I wish you a lovely day.